Now, it's probably a mistake for me to reveal this to you, but I've spent coming up to a half a century in the world of healthcare. I started out as a candy striper in my early teens, and I had my first real job, 90 cents an hour, as a nurse's aide in our local hospital. And in all these years, it's never occurred to me once that I should actually change the direction of my profession or my career passion. And the reason is embedded in the quote that I have on the screen here. This is a piece of a quote from my favorite poet, arguably the best poet to ever come out of America, Walt Whitman. But it's not from his poetry. Some of you may know that during the Civil War, he worked in the Army hospitals as a nurse's aide. And this is part of a quote from his diary in which he said, "Today I was lucky. Today I had the chance to do good." And that, of course, is what's kept me grounded in healthcare all these years. I've had some amazing positions, including my 12-year stint at UHN. But almost exactly 3 years ago today, I was appointed as the president and CEO of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And that appointment brought an entire new level of meaning to this concept, the chance to do good. So let me tell you a little bit about what happens to me right at the beginning. As you can imagine, it was the beginning of the holiday season. I actually started my job on December 1st. So I went to the usual array of holiday parties and was, to my surprise, the center of attention. And not necessarily the center of attention to congratulate me on my new appointment or to ask me what I thought about it, but to tell me stories. In that holiday season, I learned that my next-door neighbor's brother had been an inmate of the asylum in London since his late teenage years. I learned that one of the people that I was a resident with had not one but two sons who had died of suicide. I found that another close acquaintance had a child who set fires. And possibly the most poignant story was from a close colleague who explained to me that she was a recovering alcoholic and had been sober for 2 years. These are people I knew really well. These are people that I obviously didn't know at all. So I vowed in that month of getting to know the world of mental health that I was going to bring my entire self to this newfound passion, this new area of healthcare that I somehow stumbled upon as an amazing opportunity. And I use this symbol here as a indication of all of the different parts of me that I try to bring to the world of mental health and the changes that we're trying to enact as a sector. Some of you will recognize this as one of the 12 Chagall windows in Hadassah Hospital in Israel. And I like it because obviously it represents many, many parts. And I like to think that the sunny yellow parts just represent the strength and the enthusiasm I bring from a pretty simple and gentle childhood. Other parts of it represent the education that I've had, the experiences that I've had. And of course, it's really wonderful to be able to bring one's positional power, to be able to speak on behalf of those individuals in society who have either no voice at all or very soft voices, to be able to amplify that and to make a difference. So what is it that I bring all of me to? I bring it to a new world, something quite new to me that is, in fact, in a couple of words, it's change management writ large. And what I'm going to tell you in the next few minutes, 3 times, is that to me, it's about having the opportunity to boldly name the changes that need to be made, to negotiate them with all of the stakeholders, particularly people who work in mental health and society at large, and then to navigate that change to some safe place, to shepherd it to an area of goodness and positivity. And the theme that I want you to hear running through this is one of opening your mind to all perspectives that can be brought to bear in an area that requires some massive change. Things aren't necessarily always as they seem, and sometimes it's not possible when you're in an area that has so deeply embedded in it certain ways of being to actually see how things could be. And I'm going to challenge you to take a look at this image and imagine what it does represent and what it could represent. This is from a Porter airplane coming into Toronto, and I'm sure you can imagine that the plane didn't land. But when I first saw this, it was taken by the person who was sitting next to me. When I first saw it, I was confused by it, and I thought it looked like water. I thought that it looked like Toronto being engulfed by a tidal wave. And in fact, about an hour later, when we circled back around, it was gone. And in fact, it was obviously just the fog and haze, and the sun had burned it off, and Toronto emerged as it always was and as it always could be in its beautiful goodness. So to me, that's a great image that explains how easy it is to get caught up in a certain way of looking at things and to close yourself off, to close down the options before you absolutely need to. So let's talk about the naming it, negotiating it, and navigating it. What you see here is an image of the provincial insane asylum that was built in 1850. It was the first building in Toronto that was actually designed by a real honest-to-goodness architect, John Howard. And sadly, it's lost. It's lost, it's gone, but it's certainly not forgotten. It had to come down. Despite fairly extensive local efforts to save it, it became clear at one point in the 70s that its walls had become imbued with the anger, the sadness, pain and suffering that was experienced in it, and it simply couldn't continue to exist. And it became a symbol of not only the hopelessness that until recently people with mental illness experienced, but also the helplessness, the learned helplessness of the sector, in the words of the psychologists, that was used to being put aside, used to being marginalized, used to being dismissed. And as a result, in many cases where that happens, the sector fragmented, turned in on itself, and became disorganized and actually hapless. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from various funders at different levels of government that we should come back when we get our acts together. Come back when we can all speak with one voice. And that's one of the major directions that we're driving towards. But you know, it's not hard to imagine why people became hopeless about the world of mental illness, and it's not hard to find examples of how the confusion plays out. From popular culture, here are 4 themes from movies that many of you, I'm sure, have seen. And it becomes unclear when you don't know what the causes or the contributing factors are in a very basic neuroscience sense. You don't understand what the potential mitigating factors are for mental illness. And you can be confused and imagine that suicidal depression in the case of George and a single man is abnormal, even when it's precipitated by the death of your one true love. Donnie Darko was a psychotic person, ill, or was, as was thought in the 1960s, perhaps he was responding in a normal way to an insane world. Who knows what happened to Hannibal Lecter in his childhood, what framed him and made his personality to create someone who seems just simply bad. And then, of course, the mystery of things like autism or various types of developmental delay that we are so intrigued by but confused by. How can something make your brain so dysfunctional in a social sense and yet at the same time exist in someone who has incredible talents, as did Raymond Babbitt in Rain Man? So finding that hope is absolutely key. And I'll come back to that a little bit later when I talk about another metaphor. But it's the year 2012, and it's all changed now. We know things, we can see things, and we can do things. We know that there are some genetic components that contribute to the major mental illnesses like bipolar diseases, schizophrenia, and probably have an impact on the potential for addictions. My neurosurgeon friends used to say that imaging was everything, because if you can see something, you can touch it, and you can study it, and you can fix it. Probably a little bit more complicated when we're talking about mental illness, but it's the case now that we can see things at the cellular and the molecular level that give us major clues about what the potential is for identifying causes for mental illness, preventing them, and last but not least, we now know that we can do things. The image you see there is of neural connections through a PET CT. And unlike when I was a resident in the 1980s, when we believed that the adult brain was immutable, we now know that it can change. It can change for the worse in the case of various external and internal stressors, particularly trauma. And we also know that various treatments, everything from talking therapy to electric shock therapy, actually change the brain connections in a way that can improve the signs and symptoms of mental illness. So in fact, there is hope. And once you've named that hopelessness, that helplessness, and that helplessness, you have an opportunity to actually move forward and negotiate it. Negotiate the change that has to take place, not only on an individual level, but with society. I absolutely love this map. It hangs in my office, and it was given to me by one of our foundation board members. And you see here that I'm not sure if this, obviously I'm going to have to put it up here, but that probably isn't going to work. But this is the Provincial Lunatic Asylum, and it's named that. When it was first built in 1850, it was actually in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of farmland. The map has a date on it of 1910, so you can actually see that by 1910, it perhaps wasn't necessarily so fearsome to live near an asylum. And all of the very, very cool aspects of the city are now on this map. There is the Gladstone Hotel, and the Drake Hotel, and Ossington Avenue, and Liberty Village. So, in fact, over a period of 100 years, we've seen an evolution to where society is growing closer to understanding, to moving into and breaking down the barriers that separate polite society from people with mental illness, that actually have to be, that actually the people inside the walls have to be protected. That's actually going away. And now, today, if you have the opportunity to come by CAMH, what you'll see is that those roads actually go right in through the organization. It's no longer separate from the local neighborhood. It's actually part of it. And we've been very, very successful as an organization in negotiating that change, doing the community consultations and the change management that has to take place for the acceptance of a large mental health institution in a neighborhood, in a local neighborhood. And the idea, of course, is that we have to move towards rejecting that concept of powerlessness. And I'm going to remind everybody here, we've heard from a number of people who live and work in the world of cancer, that mental health, mental illness is not the only condition that has been the subject of stigmatization. It was certainly in the 20th century when people with cancer also were behind closed doors. And it wasn't until the 1950s when the beginnings of a movement occurred to actually change this. The person in this image is Siddhartha Mukherjee, who is the author of a book called The Emperor of All Maladies, and the subtitle is A Biography of Cancer. And the thing that I found so intriguing about this story is the evolution of how people think and talk about cancer compared with mental illness, and what the opportunities are. And Mukherjee in this describes the idea of creating a movement and what it takes. And he describes the concept that it takes 4 things. It takes a prophet, a prophecy, a holy book, and a sign from God. He doesn't say it exactly that way, but something like that. And he talks about the social political movement that was driven by a woman named Mary Lasker for almost 20 years to change laws and to bring social acceptance to the idea of funding for cancer that ultimately resulted in Richard Nixon declaring a war on cancer in 1971. And the prophecy was that you actually could cure cancer. And the prophecy was based on the fact, a very, very tiny fact, that individuals with leukemia, a durable remission could be produced. And that, in terms of changing that through a holy book, book by someone named Garb, I think it was called Curing Cancer or something like that. The idea of this one area of cancer being curable was extended and given and used to give hope to a broader amount of society and really get the movement going. And I wonder if anybody remembers what the sign from God was that actually consolidated this idea of a movement. It was the moon landing, of all things. So remember in the late 1960s, the cancer movement took that, and the tagline of the major aspects of fundraising and movement were, if we can put on man on the moon, we can cure cancer. I think in the world of mental health, we have the makings of a prophet. I personally would like to nominate George Cope and his work through Bell for that. We definitely have the science that is probably at a more advanced level when we think of the brain than was the understanding in 1950 or even 1970 about the origins of cancer. And now we need the Holy Book, and I'm waiting for a sign from God. So what are we doing at CAMH? We're trying our best to bring a very practical and powerful voice to the changes that need to occur. CAMH is the largest academic health science center in North America that's devoted to mental illness and addictions. And as such, we have some huge opportunities. We're one of the top 3 in terms of preeminence with respect to our care, our research, and our educational activities in the world. But we have a fantastic vision statement in transforming, in the term transforming lives. But what I would say more specifically is that the leadership vision around CAMH is that we do stake a claim to that title of being one of the top mental health institutions in the world. But there's a second part. We need to be an inspiration to all of our stakeholders. We need to be spoken of with reverence by the people in our neighborhood and supported to do the work that we do. And when we put forward our very, very bold strategic plan with 6 specific directions that I'll talk about a little bit, it was really not a tinkering at the margins. This is about reimagining the organization itself, completely redefining the purpose of the organization, creating a new emphasis and direction for the work that we do within the organization, and, as I said, negotiating that future with our stakeholders. We're just starting down the line of a consistent narrative, and we have a lot of work to do with our partners to make that narrative consistent across the entire sector. I mentioned that it's important to us to be liked and be inspirational to our neighborhood because we are very, very deeply embedded in the West Queen West neighborhood. But like a nice large handful of healthcare or publicly funded organizations across North America, we totally subscribe to the fact that we actually owe society, that in the movements of our organization, we actually have to give back in a very practical way to our local environment. And we do that by trying very hard to speak to a value that's higher than our own self-interests. So I have up here our 3 values, the organizational core values that were words that actually came from the staff of the organization through a fairly complicated process about 18 months ago now. Courage, respect, and excellence. And in our neighborhood, we strive to actually make that come alive for the people who walk around and through our campus. And I think we hit a wonderful flashpoint recently. One of my executive directors was expecting a visit from someone from the National Mental Health Commission. And she told her on the phone the very specific directions to give the cab driver to find her way to CAMH. When she arrived in our offices, she pointed out to us that the cab driver said, when he heard she was going to CAMH, I know exactly where to take you. I know which building to take you to, and you won't believe how beautiful it is when you get there. The place looks fantastic, and the neighborhood's really happy. So the cab driver test has been passed, and now we can move on to something bigger and better. Now I can tell you it's really intriguing to imagine that one's the princess or the queen or the empress of a big movement, but in fact, like the little prince, I'm just sitting on an asteroid here. And we absolutely understand that we need to move this activity outwards and forwards into the rest of the world. And that's going to take a number of very specific actions. I mentioned that we have a new strategic plan, and it has 6 directions. They're very simple and straightforward. We intend to actually change the way that mental health care is delivered. We need to actually earn a reputation for excellence. We intend to build more places, but also build partnerships and improve that fractious network of activities that are going on in mental health now, so that we can move forward together and do some really fantastic things. We intend to ignite discovery and innovation, to revolutionize education in mental health care, and in fact, we are driving towards making major social changes as an organization. So we definitely have a very practical plan, and in terms of navigating the future for us, the first step is to change the way people think and talk about mental illness. We're very proud of this campaign that has been supported and developed through our foundation. We have both our president and our board chair here, and I want to publicly thank you for the role that the foundation has had in bringing this forward. And I can tell you story after story about how this has played out. My 2 favorites are being in the Cineplex varsity at the Manulife Center and seeing the little clip on the screen, the little trailer that we have out, and I hope some of you have seen it. And it ends with dead silence. And the movie theater is silent, and after a couple of seconds, someone says, "Wow." And that's just the way it feels, wow. And yes, it's there. It's in front of everybody in the movie theaters on TV. But my absolute favorite is that my younger son was coming home from his summer job in the subway, and he saw a mother teaching her preschooler to read using the simple words that appear on the ads. And snap out of it, I referred to something like that earlier to someone I was talking to, and it's about that. It's about believing that people have anguish, have pain, and have behavioral changes that are real. They're not pretend, they're not fake, and you can't just snap out of it. And to navigate it, we as an organization and as a public actually need to not be fearful of the changes that are happening. Some of them are really out there and very bold, not the least of which is talking about mental health using colloquialisms like we're using here. But I'd like to talk about the organization as being inspired by change and in charge of change. And that's why we've talked about our strategic plan as Vision 2020. And in the world of mental health, we do run the risk as a large organization of being seen as a monolith, and we have some very important work to do to build relationships throughout the mental health sector. And it's true that CAMH is large and we're a resource to lead, but it's my goal to make sure that we're structured to share. And the language that is important for me to ensure is used throughout the sector is that while we understand that we have a duty to take a leadership role, we will do it with the greatest humility, and we will engender partnerships that are respectful, and we will have friendships that are generous. And I think with that combination of activities as a large organization, we can get past some of the negativity with which CAMH has been burdened in the past. And that collaboration takes some very special forms. One of my mentors once told me that the way you get things done is to stuff yourself with information and get allies. And this is a wonderful image that I'll tell you about that is meaningful to me because it was given to me by one of my colleagues from New Zealand. And we have an Australian here, but I don't know if we have any New Zealanders that know that these three baskets represent Maori proverb or wakasoki, and the saying beneath it is "Naku te roro, no te roro ka ora ai te iwi." And loosely translated, that is, with your basket and with my basket, the people will live. And I use this over and over again to explain how important it is to work together as a healthcare sector, to collaborate for change, to do some of the things that we absolutely need to do to move forward. I'm going to tell you one more story that, as I'm closing, that explains another reason why I'm so passionate about this organization. If you think about it, the job that I came from in terms of budget, expense budget, in terms of the people that worked for me, was quite a bit larger than the job that I took on as the head of CAMH. But it was clear to me when I was exploring it, and it became abundantly clear after I came into the organization, that it wasn't just the job of running a large hospital. I soon realized that sometimes it feels like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders, that I carry the voice for mental health, certainly in Ontario and in Canada, and to some extent in the United States. And I understand that as an organization, we have to own the whole problem. And this became really, really poignantly obvious to me when shortly after I started at CAMH, I had a visit at the Don jail. And probably don't know this, but there is a section in the Don jail for people who are awaiting either some sort of legal action or a trial, and or transfer to a healthcare facility. And so we were taken down to this area that is probably in the basements. I don't remember seeing any light in it. There are maybe 15, 18 people in orange jumpsuits walking around behind bars, literally behind bars. And we made a bit of a stir when we came in, because there were a half dozen of us, and we heard whispers, "Who are they? Who are those people?" And someone said, "They're from CAMH." Everybody in that holding area glommed over to the bars and said, "We're from CAMH too. We're from CAMH too." And I actually, it was possibly one of the most poignant moments in my entire career, understanding that those were people I needed to take in my arms and take home with me. And that's what I mean by owning the whole problem. We have to be understanding what this is about, and paying tribute to the people that have done hard work in the past, and moving forward. The image that you see here is an art installation that was commissioned by a mental health facility just outside of Boston several years ago, and the installation is referred to as Bloom. The building is going to be demolished, and after 91 years of existence, the leadership felt that there needed to be some sort of an articulation of thanks a tribute to the people who worked there and sought care there. And the installation consisted of 28,000 pots of flowers, of blooming flowers throughout the organization, on the stairwells, on the floors, in the basement, in the swimming pool, and the tribute was to all those people who never got flowers. And at just about the same time that I saw this, there was a little piece in the Globe and Mail about a U.S. sailor who was shipwrecked on the shore just off Newfoundland. He was black, one of very few black Navy people in those days, and he described being washed upon the shore and being cared for by the Newfoundlanders, and being shocked because he had never seen anything but hatred in the eyes of white people when they cared for him. And his quote was, "They just rained humanity on me. They just rained humanity on me." And to circle back to the work that has to be done here to own the whole problem, this is about demanding that people who are citizens, people who are human beings and citizens, have civil rights, they have health care rights that are not being acknowledged and not met. And so one of the big duties that we have at CAMH and as a society is to demand that those grave social injustices that have been done be undone. And that is, as I said, going to take a lot more reimagining not only CAMH, but reimagining how the rest of the world responds to people who have illnesses that change their behavior and their ability to interact with the rest of the world in a way that we think is right and with normal and is normal. So I will conclude by going back to my earlier point that this is all about naming the problems that we have at hand. It's about negotiating their resolution with everybody involved, and it's about then finding a peaceful path to a resolution or navigating that, navigating or shepherding the pathway to some wonderful final conclusion. And my last plea, of course, is to understand that things aren't always as they seem. This image, this perspective is of one of the three remaining walls standing on our Queen Street campus. It's now a heritage site, so it won't be torn down. And it has a number of interpretations. It was built by patients who were either forced labor or where they were getting occupational therapy. It can be a constraining concept surrounding our thinking on mental illness, but it can also be an embrace for the goodness that we're trying to enact in the future. So thank you very much.